In the heart of modern Europe lies the Kingdom of Valdoria, where tradition meets the digital age, and where a single conversation between father and son would reshape a nation forever. What the world witnessed as a routine royal engagement was actually the culmination of months of secret planning, personal sacrifice, and a love so deep that a king would willingly step aside to save both his son and his kingdom. This is not just a story of power changing hands. It's the story of how sometimes the greatest act of leadership is knowing when to let go. The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Valdoria Castle like secrets waiting to be told. King Alexander VII stood at his office window, watching the sunrise paint the kingdom's capital in shades of gold and amber. At 68, he had ruled Valdoria for 32 years, guiding the small but prosperous nation through economic booms, political challenges, and the delicate balance of maintaining royal tradition in an increasingly modern world. The king's reflection showed a man who wore his years with dignity, though the recent months had etched deeper lines around his eyes. His silver hair, once the subject of fashion magazines, now seemed to carry the weight of unspoken burdens. Today would be different from all the others that came before it, though the world would not immediately understand why. "Your Majesty," came a soft voice from behind him. His private secretary, Elena Marchetti, entered with her usual morning briefing materials. She had served 3 generations of Valdorian royalty and possessed an almost supernatural ability to read the moods of those she served. "The morning reports, Elena?" Alexander asked, though his attention remained fixed on the view beyond the glass. "The Prime Minister requests an audience at 11. The Finance Minister has concerns about the new trade agreements with neighboring Astoria." She paused, consulting her tablet. "Prince William has arrived early for your private lunch." At the mention of his son's name, Alexander's posture straightened slightly. Prince William had been scheduled to arrive at noon, but his early appearance suggested the same nervous energy that had been building between them for weeks. "Send word to the prince that I'll see him now instead of waiting for lunch," Alexander said, finally turning from the window. "And Elena, please ensure we're not disturbed. Mark it as a private family matter." As Elena departed, Alexander moved to his desk, where a leather portfolio lay closed. Inside were documents that would change everything. Papers that represented months of careful consideration, legal consultation, and sleepless nights. The decision had not come easily, but it had come completely. Prince William entered the office with the confident stride that had made him a favorite with the Valdorian people, but his father noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his usually relaxed demeanor carried an undercurrent of anticipation. "Father," William said, offering a slight bow that had become more habit than protocol between them in private moments. "William, please sit." Alexander gestured to the comfortable chairs arranged near the fireplace, away from the formal atmosphere of his desk. "We have much to discuss." As they settled into their seats, Alexander studied his 35-year-old son. William had grown into everything a future king should be: intelligent, compassionate, well-educated, and genuinely loved by the people. His marriage to Lady Catherine Somers 3 years earlier had been celebrated throughout the kingdom, not just as a royal wedding, but as a love story that had captured hearts across the nation. "You've been meeting with Lord Chancellor Morrison quite frequently," William observed, his blue eyes, so like his father's, watching Alexander carefully. "Among others," Alexander confirmed. "William, what I'm about to share with you must remain between us until we decide together how to proceed." The prince leaned forward, his full attention focused on his father's words. "For the past 6 months, I've been dealing with a situation that extends far beyond the usual challenges of ruling," Alexander began. "Dr. Jaber, Harrison has been monitoring some concerning symptoms I've been experiencing. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but progressive enough that it will impact my ability to fulfill my duties as king in the coming years." William's face paled. "Father, what kind of symptoms?" Alexander held up a hand to forestall the inevitable questions. "Early-stage neurological issues that affect memory and decision-making capabilities. The progression is slow, but it's inevitable. Dr. Harrison estimates I have perhaps 2 to 3 years before the symptoms become noticeable to the public, and maybe 5 years before they become truly debilitating." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. William processed this information, his training in crisis management warring with his emotions as a son. There are treatments, William said finally, medical advances, specialists who... All of which I've explored thoroughly, Alexander interrupted gently. This isn't a decision made in haste or without hope, William. It's a decision made with clear eyes and careful planning. Alexander rose and retrieved the leather portfolio from his desk, returning to place it on the small table between them. "What's this?" William asked, though something in his voice suggested he already suspected. "The formal documentation for a voluntary abdication," Alexander said simply. "Not immediately, but within the next 6 months. Enough time to prepare the nation, to ensure a smooth transition, and to allow you to step fully into the role you were born for." William stared at the portfolio as if it contained something dangerous. "Father, surely we don't need to move this quickly. If you have years before I become a shadow of myself." Alexander's voice carried a note of steel that reminded William why his father had been such an effective ruler. "Before I make decisions that could harm our kingdom? Before the people lose faith in the stability of the crown?" Alexander moved to stand beside his son's chair, placing a hand on his shoulder. "William, I've spent months considering every alternative. The kindest thing I can do for Valdoria, for our family and for myself, is to step aside while I can still do so with dignity and purpose." The prince looked up at his father, seeing not just the king but the man who had raised him, taught him, and prepared him for this moment without either of them realizing it. "The people love you," William said softly. "They trust you. They don't know me as a ruler. They know you as their future king, and that's enough to begin with," Alexander replied. "The rest you'll earn just as I did, just as my father did before me. But William, you'll do it with advantages I never had. You'll begin with the full support of a living predecessor. You'll have time to grow into the role without crisis forcing your hand. And most importantly, you'll rule knowing that this transition was made out of love, not loss." William stood and walked to the same window where his father had been standing earlier. The view encompassed not just the capital city, but rolling hills dotted with farms, forests, and small towns. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay the borders of their small kingdom, a nation of just over 2 million people who had prospered under his father's rule. "What about Mother?" William asked. "Does she know?" "Your mother has known from the beginning," Alexander said. "It was actually her suggestion that we move forward with this plan rather than wait for circumstances to force our hand. Queen Margaret has always been more practical than either of us, and she sees the wisdom in choosing our timing rather than having it chosen for us." Alexander joined his son at the window. "She also pointed out something I hadn't fully considered. By abdicating while I'm still healthy enough to serve as an advisor and support, I can help guide your early years as king. That's an opportunity few monarchs have. And Catherine?" William asked, referring to his wife. "Will become queen consort earlier than expected, yes. But she's proven herself more than capable of handling royal responsibilities. The people already see her as part of the royal family, and her background in international relations will serve the kingdom well." William was quiet for several long moments, processing not just the immediate implications, but the long-term consequences of what his father was proposing. 6 months, he said finally. 6 months to prepare the kingdom, to work with Parliament on the transition procedures, and to ensure that when the moment comes, it feels like a natural evolution rather than a crisis response. William turned to face his father directly. "And you're certain this is what you want?" Alexander's smile carried both sadness and relief. "What I want is to see my son become the king I know he can be, while I'm still here to witness it and to offer whatever support he might need. What I want is to ensure that our kingdom continues to prosper under stable leadership. What I want is to make this choice while it's still mine to make." The prince nodded slowly, understanding finally settling over him like acceptance of a long-anticipated responsibility. "Then we'll do this together," William said, extending his hand to his father. As they shook hands, both men understood that this moment marked the beginning of a transition that would reshape not just their own lives, but the future of the kingdom of Valdoria. Outside the window, the morning sun climbed higher, casting new shadows and illuminating new possibilities. The secret they now shared would remain between them for only a few more weeks, but the consequences of this conversation would echo through generations of Valdorian history. 3 weeks after the conversation that changed everything, the kingdom of Valdoria appeared to continue its normal rhythms. The morning newspapers carried their usual mix of political commentary, economic reports, and social events from the royal calendar. Citizens went about their daily lives, unaware that fundamental changes were already in motion behind the ancient walls of the castle. Prince William had thrown himself into his royal duties with an intensity that didn't go unnoticed by the royal staff or the media. His schedule, already full, had expanded to include meetings with government officials, extensive briefings on domestic and international affairs, and private consultations with his father that stretched far longer than their previous casual encounters. Your Royal Highness Sir James Whitmore, the royal press secretary, approached William as he finished a meeting with the environmental minister. The press has begun asking questions about your increased visibility. They're wondering if there are specific initiatives you're preparing to announce. William paused in reviewing his notes, considering how to respond without revealing the truth they weren't yet ready to share. Simply tell them that I'm taking a more active role in supporting the king's agenda. It's natural for me to become more involved as I prepare for my future responsibilities. Sir James nodded, but his expression suggested the answer wouldn't satisfy the press corps for long. The Valdorian media, while respectful of the royal family, was notably sharp when it came to political developments. There's also been speculation about the king's recent consultations with constitutional lawyers, Sir James added carefully. This was the development William had been expecting but dreading. Nothing remains secret forever in the interconnected world of modern governance, and constitutional lawyers were not typically consulted for routine matters. I'll speak with the king about how we want to address that speculation, William said. For now, simply state that the king regularly consults with legal experts on various matters of governance. After Sir James departed, William made his way to his father's private study, where he found King Alexander reviewing documents with Lord Chancellor Morrison and Queen Margaret.
William, perfect timing,
his mother said, looking up from a thick folder of papers. We were just discussing the timeline for the public announcement. Queen Margaret, at 62, remained one of the most popular figures in Valdoria. Her grace, intelligence, and genuine care for the people had made her not just a beloved queen, but a trusted advisor to her husband throughout his reign. Her silver hair was elegantly styled, and her sharp green eyes missed nothing that happened around her. The press is starting to ask questions, William reported. Sir James is concerned that speculation will soon outpace our ability to control the narrative. Lord Chancellor Morrison, a distinguished man in his 70s who had served the crown for over 2 decades, cleared his throat. Your Majesty, if I may suggest, we're reaching the point where proactive communication will serve us better than reactive responses. King Alexander set down the document he had been reading. How much time do you estimate we have before speculation becomes problematic? Perhaps 2 weeks, possibly 3 at the outside, Morrison replied. The constitutional consultations have attracted attention from several sources. While we've maintained confidentiality, informed observers are beginning to piece together patterns. Queen Margaret leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Perhaps it's time to consider who we tell first, before any public announcement. The Prime Minister, William said immediately. He'll need time to prepare his response and ensure government stability during the transition. Agreed, Alexander nodded, and the leaders of the other major political parties. This can't appear to be a partisan political move. The Archbishop, Queen Margaret added. The religious community will want to understand the spiritual aspects of this decision, and key members of the Commonwealth, Morrison suggested. Our relationships with neighboring kingdoms and republics will require careful handling. As they discussed the expanding circle of people who would need to be informed, William felt the weight of secrecy beginning to lift slightly, replaced by the different but perhaps more manageable weight of public responsibility. There's another consideration, Alexander said quietly. Catherine should be more prominently featured in royal events over the next few weeks. The people need to see her as ready to assume the role of queen consort. William's wife had been remarkably composed when he shared his father's decision with her. Lady Catherine had always understood that her marriage to William meant eventual queenship, but she had expected years more to prepare for the transition. She's been studying intensively, William said with obvious pride. Constitutional law, Diplomatic protocol, the history of Valdorian queens. She's determined to be ready. She's a remarkable young woman, Queen Margaret said warmly. The people already love her, and she has excellent instincts for public service. Over the following days, the carefully orchestrated preparation continued. William began making solo appearances at events that would traditionally have included his father, while Alexander gradually reduced his public schedule. The changes were subtle enough that they could be attributed to normal variations in royal duties, but significant enough that William began to feel the full weight of representing the crown. The transformation was most evident during William's meeting with the Prime Minister Thomas Hartwell, a seasoned politician who had worked closely with King Alexander for over a decade. "Your Royal Highness," Prime Minister Hartwell said as they met in the Prime Minister's official residence, "I hope you don't mind me saying that you seem to have taken on additional responsibilities recently." William had been expecting this conversation. "Prime Minister, I believe it's time we had a frank discussion about some upcoming changes in the royal household." The Prime Minister's expression became more alert. "Changes, Your Royal Highness? My father has asked me to inform you that within the next few months he will be announcing his intention to abdicate in my favor." The silence that followed was profound. Prime Minister Hartwell, despite his experience in handling political surprises, required several moments to process this information. "May I ask," he said finally, "the reasoning behind this decision?" William had rehearsed this explanation, knowing that the Prime Minister's reaction would likely be repeated by others who learned of the decision. "The king believes that the kingdom will best be served by a transition made at a time and manner of our choosing, rather than one forced by circumstances beyond our control. He wants to ensure continuity of leadership and to provide support during my early years as king." Prime Minister Hartwell leaned back in his chair, his political mind already working through implications and possibilities. "The government will need to prepare for the constitutional procedures involved in an abdication," he said. "It's been several centuries since we've dealt with such a situation. Lord Chancellor Morrison is preparing the necessary documentation," William assured him. "We want to ensure that every legal and constitutional requirement is met perfectly." "And the king's health?" the Prime Minister asked, diplomatically. "The king remains in good health and fully capable of his duties," William replied, sticking to the carefully crafted response they had prepared. "This decision is about optimal timing for the kingdom's future, not about any immediate necessity." The Prime Minister nodded slowly. "When do you anticipate making this public?" "Within the next 2 to 3 weeks. We wanted to ensure that key government leaders were informed before any public announcement." "I appreciate that consideration," Hartwell said. "The government will need to coordinate our response to ensure stability and confidence in the transition." As William left the Prime Minister's residence, he reflected on how the conversation had been both easier and more difficult than expected. Easier because the Prime Minister had responded professionally and supportively, but more difficult because it made the reality of his father's decision more concrete and irreversible. That evening, as William and Catherine walked through the private gardens of their residence, she asked the question he had been asking himself. "Do you feel ready?" William paused beside a fountain that had been installed by his great-grandfather. The sound of water cascading over centuries-old stone seemed to emphasize the continuity he would soon be responsible for maintaining. "I don't think anyone ever feels completely ready to be king," he said honestly. "But I feel prepared in ways that many of my predecessors weren't. I have my father's guidance, your support, and the advantage of a peaceful transition." Catherine took his hand. "And I'll be there with you, learning as we go." "Queen Catherine," William said, trying out the title that would soon be hers. She smiled, though he could see the nervousness behind it. "It has a nice sound to it, doesn't it?" As they continued their walk, both understood that these peaceful moments together were becoming more precious. Soon, their lives would belong even more completely to the kingdom and its people. Behind them, lights glowed in the windows of the castle, where King Alexander worked late into the night, preparing a kingdom for transition and a son for the crown that would soon be his. The announcement came on a crisp October morning, delivered simultaneously through multiple channels to ensure clarity and prevent misinterpretation. At precisely 10 o'clock, Sir James Whitmore stood before the assembled press corps in the castle's grand ballroom, his usually composed demeanor carrying an additional gravity that immediately captured attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "His Majesty King Alexander VII has asked me to read the following statement." The room fell silent, cameras focusing. recording devices activated, and pens poised over notebooks. After 32 years of service to the Kingdom of Valdoria and its people, I have decided to abdicate the throne in favor of my son, Prince William. This decision comes not from necessity, but from my belief that our kingdom will best be served by this transition at this time. Prince William has demonstrated his readiness to assume the responsibilities of kingship, and I look forward to supporting him in this new role. The formal ceremony of abdication will take place on December 15th, after which Prince William will be crowned King William V. Until that time, I will continue to fulfill all duties of the crown. I want to assure the people of Valdoria that this decision comes from a place of love for our kingdom and confidence in its future. The explosion of questions that followed was immediate and overwhelming, but Sir James had prepared for this moment. His Majesty will address the nation tonight at 8 o'clock, he announced over the noise. Prince William will hold a press conference tomorrow morning at 10. No further questions will be taken at this time. Within hours, news of the abdication had spread far beyond Valdoria's borders. International news networks picked up the story. Constitutional experts were called in for commentary, and social media buzzed with reactions ranging from surprise to support to speculation about the underlying reasons. In the castle, King Alexander watched the coverage from his private study, accompanied by Queen Margaret and William. The initial reaction seems positive, Queen Margaret observed, scanning reports from various news sources on her tablet. The BBC is calling it a graceful transition for a modern monarchy, and the European papers are focusing on the precedent for voluntary abdication. Any negative responses? Alexander asked. Some concern about stability, William reported, reviewing social media reactions on his phone. But overall, people seem to understand that this was a thoughtful decision rather than a crisis response. The real test would come that evening, during King Alexander's televised address to the nation. At 8 o'clock, television screens across Valdoria and beyond showed the familiar setting of the king's study, where Alexander sat behind his desk wearing a navy blue suit rather than formal royal regalia. "My fellow Valdorians," he began, his voice carrying the warmth and authority that had characterized his reign, "tonight I want to speak with you about change, about tradition, and about the future of our beloved kingdom." He had chosen his words carefully, working with speechwriters, but insisting on language that reflected his own voice and genuine emotions. "For over 3 decades, you have honored me with your trust, your support, and your patience, as I have endeavored to serve as your king. Together, we have faced challenges and celebrated triumphs. We have modernized our institutions while preserving our traditions. We have strengthened our place in the international community while never forgetting our unique Valdorian identity." Alexander paused, his gaze seeming to reach through the camera to individual citizens across the kingdom. "Now, I believe, is the time for the next chapter in our kingdom's story. Prince William has spent his entire life preparing for the responsibilities of kingship. He has demonstrated wisdom, compassion, and dedication to our people. Most importantly, he brings a fresh perspective that will serve our kingdom well in the years ahead." The king went on to outline the timeline for the transition, the constitutional procedures that would be followed, and his intention to remain in Valdoria to support his son during the early years of his reign. "This decision comes not from weakness but from strength," Alexander said, his voice gaining intensity. "The strength to choose our timing rather than have it chosen for us. The strength to ensure continuity rather than uncertainty. The strength to step aside when the moment is right rather than when circumstances force the issue." He concluded with words that would be quoted in history books. "I have spent my life in service to Valdoria, and that service continues in a new form. I remain your devoted servant, and I look forward to watching our kingdom flourish under King William's leadership." The response to the address was overwhelmingly positive. Opinion polls conducted in the days following showed strong support for both the decision to abdicate and the readiness of Prince William to assume the crown. William's press conference the next morning drew an even larger media crowd, with international journalists joining the local press corps. "Your Royal Highness," began Sarah Matthews from the Valdorian Herald, "how do you feel about assuming the throne earlier than you might have expected?" William, standing at a podium in the same ballroom where the announcement had been made, appeared calm and confident. "While the timing might be different than we originally anticipated, "I feel prepared for this responsibility," he replied. "I've had the extraordinary advantage of learning from one of the finest kings in Valdorian history, and I'm honored by the trust both my father and the people of Valdoria are placing in me." James Crawford from the International Times asked, "What will be your priorities as king?" "Continuity with innovation," William answered without hesitation. "We'll maintain the strong foundations my father has built while adapting to meet the challenges and opportunities of the modern world. Economic growth, environmental protection, and strong international relationships will remain key focuses." "And Princess Catherine?" asked Maria Santos from European Royal Watch. "How is she preparing for her role as queen?" William's expression softened slightly. "Catherine has embraced this transition with characteristic grace and determination. She's been studying intensively and working closely with my mother to understand all aspects of her future role." The people of Valdoria couldn't ask for a more dedicated queen consort. The questions continued for over an hour, covering everything from constitutional procedures to personal reflections on the magnitude of the upcoming change. Behind the scenes, the practical work of transition had begun immediately. Legal experts worked on the formal abdication documents. Event planners began organizing both the abdication ceremony and the coronation, and government officials coordinated to ensure seamless continuity of state functions. Catherine found herself at the center of intense preparation. Queen Margaret had become her constant guide, introducing her to the subtle complexities of royal protocol, while helping her develop her own authentic style of public engagement. Remember, Queen Margaret advised during one of their sessions, the people don't expect you to be perfect immediately. They expect you to be genuine, dedicated, and to grow into the role with grace. "Did you feel overwhelmed when you first became queen?" Catherine asked. Margaret smiled, remembering her own early days. "Absolutely. But I learned that the role shapes you as much as you shape it. The people of Valdoria will help you become the queen they need, just as they helped me." Meanwhile, King Alexander began the emotionally complex process of preparing to step down from the role that had defined his adult life. He met with each government minister individually, briefed William on ongoing international negotiations, and began transferring knowledge that existed nowhere except in his experience and memory. The relationship with Astoria requires constant attention, he explained to William during one of their daily briefings. "President Martinez is reliable, but her parliament has some members who would love to see our trade agreements renegotiated." "And the environmental accords with the Nordic Council?" William asked, taking notes on his tablet. "Solid, but they'll want to see your commitment to the same standards I've maintained. Arrange a meeting with the Nordic representatives within your first month as king." These conversations continued daily, covering decades of diplomatic relationships, domestic policy precedents, and the subtle art of constitutional monarchy in a democratic system. As December approached, the excitement in Valdoria became palpable. The upcoming ceremonies would be historic, marking both the end of one era and the beginning of another. Hotels in the capital were booked solid, with visitors coming to witness the transition, and television networks were preparing extensive coverage. But perhaps most importantly, the kingdom itself seemed to be embracing the change with optimism and confidence. Public opinion polls showed strong approval for both the abdication decision and William's readiness to become king. Street interviews revealed citizens who spoke of feeling excited about the future while remaining grateful for King Alexander's years of service. "It feels like the right time," said Elena Rodriguez, a teacher from the southern province, in one widely circulated television interview. "King Alexander has given us everything he had, and now Prince William can take us forward. It's actually beautiful that a father can pass this responsibility to his son when they're both ready for it." As the formal transition date approached, both father and son understood that they were participating in something unique in the modern history of monarchy, a voluntary, peaceful, and joyful passing of the crown from one generation to the next. The kingdom watched and waited, ready to witness history in the making. December 15th arrived with crystalline skies and the kind of crisp winter air that seemed to sharpen every detail into perfect clarity. The kingdom of Valdoria had awakened to a day unlike any in its modern history, when a king would voluntarily surrender his crown and a prince would accept the weight of sovereignty. The ceremonies had been planned to reflect both the solemnity of the occasion and the celebratory nature of a peaceful transition. The morning began with the formal abdication in the castle's ancient throne room, limited to family members, key government officials, and constitutional officers. The afternoon would feature William's coronation in the Grand Cathedral, opening the historic moment to representatives from across the kingdom and around the world. At 9 o'clock in the morning, King Alexander entered the throne room, wearing the full regalia of Valdorian kingship for the final time. The crown of Valdoria, crafted in the 15th century and modified by each subsequent monarch, caught the morning light streaming through the tall windows. His ceremonial robes, deep blue silk embroidered with the kingdom's coat of arms in gold thread, seemed to carry the weight of every king who had worn them before. Prince William, dressed in formal morning attire but not yet in royal regalia, stood with Catherine at his side. Her elegant navy dress and understated jewelry struck the perfect balance between respect for the occasion and readiness for her new role. Queen Margaret, wearing a dress of deep purple silk that had been specially designed for this day, watched with emotions carefully controlled but evident to those who knew her well. Lord Chancellor Morrison, carrying the constitutional documents that would formalize the transition, took his position near the ancient throne that had been the seat of Valdorian sovereignty for centuries. "My lords and ladies," Morrison began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed chamber, "we gather today to witness a moment of profound significance in the history of our kingdom." The formal language of abdication, unchanged for centuries despite the unprecedented nature of a voluntary surrender of the crown, filled the room with the weight of legal and constitutional tradition. "I, Alexander Charles Edward Valdoria, by the grace of God, King of Valdoria, do hereby renounce and abdicate the throne, crown, and dignity of King of Valdoria, and all rights, privileges, and responsibilities thereto belonging." Alexander's voice remained steady throughout the formal declaration, but those present could see the emotion in his eyes as he spoke the words that ended 32 years of kingship. "Furthermore," he continued, "I do hereby declare that the crown shall pass immediately to my son, William Alexander Charles Valdoria, whom I believe to be fully prepared and worthy to assume these sacred responsibilities." The moment of actual transition was marked by the removal of the crown of Valdoria from Alexander's head and its placement on a ceremonial cushion held by the Archbishop of Valdoria. For a few seconds, the kingdom had no crowned monarch, a constitutional moment that would be analyzed by legal scholars for years to come. "William Alexander Charles Valdoria," the Archbishop intoned, "do you accept the crown and throne of Valdoria? And do you pledge to serve the kingdom and its people with honor, wisdom, and dedication?" "I do so accept, and I do so pledge," William responded, his voice strong and clear. As the crown was placed on William's head, transforming him instantly from Prince William to King William V, the small gathering erupted in subdued but heartfelt applause. The legal and constitutional transition was complete, but the emotional and ceremonial celebration was just beginning. Alexander, now simply His Royal Highness the Duke of Valdoria, a title specially created for the former king, stepped forward to embrace his son, now his sovereign. "Long live the king," he said, his voice thick with emotion and pride. "Long live King William V," the assembly responded in unison. The private ceremony concluded with William's first official act as king, the signing of a document expressing his gratitude for his father's service and his intention to seek the former king's counsel on matters of state. It was both a formal recognition of the transition and a personal acknowledgement of the ongoing relationship between father and son. Following a brief private lunch for the royal family, the focus shifted to the Grand Cathedral for the public coronation ceremony. Unlike the intimate abdication, this event would be witnessed by over 2,000 invited guests and broadcast live to millions of viewers around the world. The cathedral, built in the 13th century and renovated several times over the centuries, had never looked more magnificent. Flowers from across the kingdom created displays that honored both the season and the significance of the day. The ancient stone walls, decorated with banners representing all regions of Valdoria, seemed to vibrate with anticipation. As the afternoon ceremony began, representatives from monarchies and republics across Europe took their places alongside Valdorian citizens from every walk of life. The guest list itself told the story of modern Valdoria. Farmers and factory workers sat near diplomats and business leaders, while teachers and students shared pews with artists and athletes. The processional began with the entrance of government officials, followed by representatives from the church, the military, and civil society. Then came the royal family, with Queen Margaret and the newly titled Duke of Valdoria taking their places in the front rows. Finally, King William V entered the cathedral with Catherine at his side. His coronation robes, newly made for this ceremony, incorporated traditional elements with subtle modern touches that reflected his generation's approach to monarchy. Catherine's gown, a creation of flowing silk in a shade of blue that complemented the royal colors, would later be described by fashion commentators as perfectly capturing the elegance and accessibility that characterized her public persona. The Archbishop of Valdoria conducted the ceremony using a liturgy that balanced ancient traditions with contemporary language, making the sacred nature of the oath accessible to modern ears while preserving its historical weight. William Alexander Charles Valdoria, the Archbishop said as William knelt before the altar. Will you solemnly promise and swear to govern the people of this kingdom of Valdoria, according to their respective laws and customs? I solemnly promise so to do, William replied. The questions and responses continued, covering his obligations to justice, mercy, and the protection of the Church and its teachings. Each answer was given with conviction and clarity, witnessed by the assembled congregation and the millions watching around the world. The moment of coronation itself was marked by the placement of the crown of Valdoria, the same crown that had been removed from his father's head just hours earlier, on William's head as he knelt in prayer. As he rose, now fully invested with the authority and responsibility of kingship, the cathedral bells began to ring, joined moments later by church bells across the kingdom and even in neighboring countries honoring the new monarch. I present unto you King William V, your undoubted king, the Archbishop announced to the congregation. Wherefore all you who are come this day to do your homage and service, are you willing to do the same? God save King William, came the thunderous response. Long live the king! Catherine's moment came immediately afterward, as she was crowned queen consort in a ceremony that emphasized her role as partner and supporter to the king, while acknowledging her own responsibilities to the kingdom. As the formal ceremonies concluded, King William V delivered his first address to the nation as sovereign. Speaking from the cathedral's pulpit, with Catherine beside him and his parents watching from the front pew, he struck themes that would define his early reign. Today marks not an ending, but a transformation, he began. The wisdom and dedication of my father's reign provides the foundation upon which we will build the future. Together, we will face the challenges and embrace the opportunities that await our kingdom. He spoke of continuity and change, of honoring traditions while adapting to modern realities, and of his deep commitment to serving every citizen of Valdoria, regardless of their background or circumstances. I am your king, he said in conclusion, but more than that, I am your servant. Catherine and I pledge our lives to the service of this kingdom and its people. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The congregation rose in sustained applause, and outside the cathedral, crowds that had gathered throughout the day erupted in celebration. Church bells continued to ring and fireworks lit the early evening sky. As the royal family emerged from the cathedral, now with a new king and queen leading the procession, they were greeted by cheering crowds that stretched for blocks in every direction. The carriage ride back to the castle became a triumphant procession, with William and Catherine waving to citizens who had traveled from across the kingdom to witness this historic day. That evening, as the official celebrations continued with a state banquet attended by dignitaries from around the world, the new King William V and Queen Catherine found a few quiet moments alone on a balcony overlooking the capital city. How do you feel? Catherine asked, her crown temporarily set aside but her new title settling around her like a comfortable garment. William considered the question, looking out over the lights of the city that was now truly his responsibility. Different, he said finally. The same person, but carrying something I've never carried before. Not just authority, but the hopes and trust of everyone out there. Catherine took his hand. We'll carry it together. As they stood together, the celebration continued around them and throughout the kingdom. In just one day, Valdoria had witnessed the end of one era and the beginning of another, marked not by crisis or conflict, but by love, preparation, and hope for the future. King William V's reign had officially begun. 6 months into the reign of King William V, the kingdom of Valdoria had settled into a new rhythm that felt both familiar and refreshingly different. The constitutional monarchy continued to function smoothly, but with subtle changes in style and emphasis that reflected the new generation's approach to royal leadership. King William had established his own patterns and priorities, maintaining the stability that had characterized his father's reign, while introducing innovations that spoke to contemporary concerns. His first major initiative, announced just 3 months after his coronation, focused on environmental sustainability and technological innovation, areas where his generation's perspective brought fresh energy to royal leadership. The Green Valdoria Initiative, as it became known, combined traditional royal support for worthy causes with modern understanding of climate change and economic opportunity. The program encouraged investment in renewable energy, supported sustainable agriculture practices, and positioned the kingdom as a leader in environmental technology among smaller European nations. Queen Catherine had found her own voice in royal service, focusing particularly on education and women's entrepreneurship. Her background in international relations proved invaluable as she developed programs that connected Valdorian women with opportunities in global markets, while her natural warmth made her an immediately popular figure in schools and universities across the kingdom. "She has a gift for making everyone feel heard," observed Dr. Dick Sarah Mitchell, the Director of Education, after accompanying the Queen on a visit to a rural school. "The children respond to her genuinely, and the teachers appreciate that she understands the real challenges they face." The transition had not been without its adjustments and learning experiences. During his 4th month as king, William faced his first serious diplomatic challenge when a trade dispute arose with the neighboring Republic of Montavia. The disagreement involved fishing rights in waters that had been peacefully shared for decades, but new leadership in Montavia had taken a more aggressive stance. William's handling of the situation demonstrated both the benefits of his preparation and the ongoing value of his father's counsel. Drawing on his studies in international relations and his natural diplomatic instincts, the new king initiated direct communication with Montavia's president while working behind the scenes with experienced diplomats to craft a solution that preserved relationships while protecting Valdorian interests. "The key," Alexander observed during one of their private weekly meetings, was recognizing that this was really about President Valdez establishing his credentials with his own parliament rather than any genuine desire to disrupt our relationship. And the fishing industry leaders understood that patience would serve them better than public pressure, William added, demonstrating his growing appreciation for the complex balance of interests that royal leadership required. The resolution, achieved through quiet negotiation rather than public confrontation, strengthened both William's reputation as a thoughtful leader and Valdoria's relationships with neighboring states. International observers noted the new king's diplomatic maturity and his ability to draw on both formal training and informal mentorship. Perhaps most importantly, the kingdom itself had embraced the transition with enthusiasm that continued to grow. Public opinion polls consistently showed strong approval ratings for both King William and Queen Catherine, while economic indicators suggested that the political stability created by the smooth transition had enhanced international confidence in Valdorian institutions. "There's an energy that wasn't there before," commented Elena Rodriguez, the teacher whose earlier interview had captured public sentiment during the transition period. "Not that King Alexander wasn't excellent, but there's something exciting about watching a young king and queen grow into their roles while still maintaining everything that made us proud of our country." The former King Alexander, now the Duke of Valdoria, had found his own new role as senior advisor and supportive father. His decision to remain actively involved in royal duties while clearly stepping back from ultimate authority had proven wise for both personal and political reasons. "I get to see my son succeed without carrying the daily weight of final responsibility," he reflected during an interview 6 months after the abdication. "And I can offer support and perspective without the burden of making the actual decisions." His health remained stable, and the early intervention he had sought continued to be effective in managing his condition. The decision to abdicate while still healthy and mentally sharp had given him the opportunity to see his son's success while contributing meaningfully to the kingdom's continued prosperity. Queen Margaret had also found renewed purpose in her evolved role. Free from the formal obligations of being the monarch's primary consort, she had increased her involvement in charitable work and had become an unofficial mentor to Catherine, sharing decades of experience while encouraging the younger woman to develop her own authentic approach to royal service. The beauty of this transition, Margaret observed, is that we've maintained institutional knowledge while allowing fresh perspectives to flourish. Catherine doesn't need to be me, and William doesn't need to be his father. They can learn from our experience while creating their own legacy. The international reaction to the transition had been overwhelmingly positive, with other monarchies and republics alike noting the peaceful and dignified nature of the change. Several constitutional scholars published articles praising the precedent set by voluntary abdication in favor of a prepared successor, suggesting that the Valdorian model might influence royal transitions in other countries facing similar generational changes. King Juan Carlos III of neighboring Astoria had been particularly complimentary, noting in a state visit that the transition had demonstrated the best traditions of European monarchy adapted for the modern world. As winter gave way to spring in William's first year as king, he and Catherine began planning their first major international initiative, a conference on sustainable development in small nations that would bring together leaders from similar-sized countries to share strategies and collaborate on common challenges. The advantage of being a smaller nation, William explained during the planning sessions, is that we can be nimble and innovative in ways that larger countries find difficult. If we can demonstrate successful approaches to environmental and economic challenges, we can influence change well beyond our borders. The conference, scheduled for the following autumn, would also mark the first anniversary of William's reign and provide an opportunity to showcase the kingdom's evolution under his leadership. On a personal level, the royal couple had found ways to maintain their relationship and individual identity despite the consuming nature of royal responsibilities. They had established regular private time together, continued their shared interests in hiking and reading, and maintained friendships with people outside the royal circle. The crown changes how others see you, Catherine reflected, but we work hard to make sure it doesn't change who we are to each other. Looking toward the future, King William V had begun articulating a vision for Valdoria that built on his father's achievements while addressing the challenges and opportunities of the decades ahead. Climate change, technological advancement, and changing patterns of international cooperation would require adaptive leadership and innovative approaches to governance. Every generation of Valdorian monarchs has faced the challenge of preserving what's valuable from the past while adapting to the realities of their time. William said during his first State of the Kingdom address, "Our challenge is to maintain the stability and prosperity that previous generations built while positioning our kingdom to thrive in a rapidly changing world." The speech, delivered in the same hall where his father had announced his abdication just over a year earlier, demonstrated William's growth into his role and his clear vision for the kingdom's future. As the sun set on that anniversary day, King William V and Queen Catherine stood once again on the balcony where they had shared those quiet moments on Coronation Day. The city below them looked the same, but their perspective had deepened through months of experience and growing confidence in their roles. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your father had chosen to continue ruling?" Catherine asked. William considered the question, thinking of all that had transpired and all that lay ahead. "I think he made the right choice for everyone involved," he said finally. "For himself, for me, for you, and for the kingdom. Sometimes the greatest gift a leader can give is knowing when to step aside and let someone else carry the responsibility forward." The kingdom of Valdoria had indeed been transformed, not by crisis or conflict, but by wisdom, love, and careful planning. The peaceful transition from King Alexander VII to King William V would be remembered as a model of how monarchical systems could adapt and evolve while preserving their essential strengths. As night fell over the kingdom, its people slept peacefully under the rule of a king who had been prepared for his role, supported by institutions that had proven their stability and guided by the continuing wisdom of the generation that had shaped the modern Valdoria. The future remained unwritten, but it belonged to leaders who had earned their people's trust and who faced tomorrow with both confidence and humility.